I like it very much, that's why But anyway, 7 Psychopaths, the movie. For those of you that haven't seen it, I'll warn you, there will be spoilers ahead, of course. As per usual, I like to make these reviews more like a holistic. Is that the right word? Probably not. It's a review, okay? It's from the start to the finish. Obviously, the conclusion will be there. Important plot points will be there. But if you haven't seen it and still are around, I might as well welcome you in with a short little introduction. It's a 2012 dark comedy crime film. That's the self-described genre of the movie. It was written and directed by Martin McDonagh, who also made the In Bruges film. You might know that was the kind of like gritty comedy, not really gritty, but it was a comedy thriller, also crime, also starring Colin Farrell, the Irish actor there in the center. Martin McDonagh also has 4 nominations and 2 Golden Globe Awards from his 3 nominations for his film 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and I believe he has 4 Academy Award nominations as well. So, you know, he's a very good writer, a very good director, and I feel that the film reflected this greatly. I really enjoy the writing. When it comes to the storytelling, that's more of a complicated story, I feel like. But yeah, the film premiered on the 7th of September at the Toronto International Film Festival, which I feel is important to know that where perhaps the creator of this festival was aiming for. You know, it wasn't. I mean, it's a big movie, big, you know, box office and everything like that, but it's directed, I felt like, to festival audiences, maybe slightly bit more than your average, you know, big blockbuster, I felt like, at least. It has generally a positive review from the critics. Rotten Tomato gave it 82%, or Rotten Tomatoes, sorry. So like an average rating actually of the audience was 7.1. But what do I think of the movie overall? When we get into the nitty-gritty, it's written extremely well. The introduction that you can see on the screen right now was very well done. It introduced us to 2 of these, you know, mafiosos, you know, kind of like bad guys, good fellas, whatever you want to call them, arguing about like shooting someone in the eyeball, and immediately you get the vibes of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, with that classic kind of 2 hitmen conversation / banter, except those 2 are then killed by what was described by the film in like a text introduction by a guy called Psychopath Number 1, which, you know, works well to subvert expectations, and it was shot rather well. If they were just shot, I felt like it would be like a little bit of a cheap way of subverting expectations, but I liked the way that it was made, because they had this conversation on a bridge. There was, you know, they were both in the frame, so sort of like slightly apart, and there was a guy walking towards them for about like 20 seconds, like way behind, and when he reached them, they, you know, he executed them both. So that was kind of the subversion of expectation that was made quite well. But back to the movie. Yeah, what I was saying, I like the scene for like the long kind of long like exposure of both of these characters, you know, having a conversation. And the reason why I said subversion of expectations is because usually when you open a film of a similar character in this way, you immediately see the 2 guys that, you know, kind of introduce the movie as the main characters. So having them killed within the first scene is some way of subverting expectation, which immediately the film kind of like distances itself from like the classic movies of the genre. It immediately tries to tell us, you know what, I'm a different kind of movie, which on one hand is kind of like a little bit of a cheap way of doing it, but it was executed so well that I didn't have an issue with it at all. It was quite fun. But going back to the dialogue, I think that the dialogue overall in this movie is written very well. Something that I have an issue with a lot with movies of all kinds, as you know, as someone who makes a living of writing, is that I can't stand some of the dialogues, and I don't always talk about it in these reviews because it tends to be quite tiring. Just me talking like, oh, this shitty dialogue, blah blah blah, this and that. So I tend to put it to a minimum unless the dialogue is really, really bad. But in this movie, it's the exact opposite. I felt like the dialogue had life, and at the same time, it provided realism, and it felt funny in a way that it's in a way where it just stayed true to like the human beings, to the characters that the film created. For example, do I have an example here? I must have an example here. Oh yeah. There was Billy, essentially, who is one of the characters played by Sam Rockwell, is trying to say something about like they're like proof be where it needs to be, some kind of proverb that even I don't understand, and it's kind of like messing up, and it, like in a funny way. And his screenwriter friend Marty, played by Colin Farrell, sorry, he was just looking at him in like disbelief, but at the same time, like making like a funny face. It's these little moments that are scattered across the film that give it the realism and enjoyment that that work to make the movie what it is. Completely agree about the dialogue. I'm glad you do. The incomparable Sam Rockwell. I was very interested to see Sam Rockwell because you talked about the fact that he's often underappreciated, and he is very good in this movie. I felt like his character in this movie, did I say in this movie enough, was interesting, to say the least. He like executed it perfectly. Although I feel like some parts, especially towards the ending, his character didn't really make sense in the way that he operated, I felt like. But yeah, he's great. He was absolutely great as an actor, and all of the cast, of course. Thank you, Scott, by the way, for the drinks on me. I'll be doing them at the end of the review, so I don't muck up your favorite movie here by failing to focus. They're not supposed to make sense. So like, I suppose I don't like these kind of explanations because it kind of takes away from the writing. Like, psychopaths are not supposed to make sense and stuff like that. It's often used as a poor excuse for poor writing. Not that would occur in this movie, but characters still should stay consistent, and psychopaths in real life even they do make sense once you understand kind of like how they work. They are still, everything in life is like everything in writing, in art, should stay consistent, and psychopaths are consistent. They just lack empathy, emotion, and tend to be pathological liars. But other than that, it's just a mental condition, just like any other. It's just this one has been more sensationalized. But anyway, we were introduced to the two characters, Billy and Marty. Marty being the screenwriter, Billy being kind of like an actor, an unsuccessful one. That's kind of like a little strange, a little crazy. And their kind of like banter and friendship is introduced to us through a couple of scenes of brilliant dialogue, which was very, very well made. And then we are treated to the introduction of Chris Walken, who plays the character of Hans, who again, like this is portrayed very believably in a very like funny way. Christopher Walken, of course, is a legendary actor himself, and we are introduced to him by what basically amounts to like a pet snatching scheme, where he essentially, lurks around a park and looks, watches dogs, and once the dogs like stray a little bit further from their masters or their owners, sorry, he would snatch them and then return it to their owners once, the owners realize that they're missing, and write up a reward. That's how he essentially makes money there, very interestingly. But yes, we are also, like, another thing that I noticed that I really like about the writing, Christopher Walken, or Hans, sorry, is while watching these dogs, he's writing a leaflet on breast cancer. And you notice it straight away because it's very well put in the shot, and it's also like an unusual thing for, like a man to be reading. And right after the pet snatching, he makes the $500 from, the grateful owner. And then he goes to see his wife in a hospital, not discussing cancer or anything like that. You immediately know, if you're paying attention to the movie, what's going on without the movie expressly telling you, essentially, which makes for better writing. It's the classic show, don't tell that I keep speaking about, that I keep kind of beating you over the head with. It's what I like. It's what makes everything better. I feel like even in writing, like when you write a story, try not to just write what these characters are like, or what they're feeling, their ambitions. Try to show it by their actions. It's definitely better. All right. Well, after Hans, that you see on the picture there, reading the breast cancer pamphlet that I told you about, is introduced, we are introduced to Woody Harrelson, another psychopath number 3, and he's introduced to us in another endearing scene. Like they make very fun scenes, maybe not endearing to his character, but endearing to the movie, at least for me. It's essentially a scene where Woody Harrelson, who I don't even know his character name. Like I just see these legendary characters, and I'm like, oh my god, it's Woody Harrelson, and just see them that way. I think of True Detective and all of that. But anyway, we are introduced to him as like a boss of some kind of crime syndicate or a mafioso of some kind, and he has, I guess his assistant, who's played by, is her name Sidibe? I felt like I forgot the name. Gaberni Sidibe? No. I may be mixing something up. But anyway, they are in some sort of a bathroom with his other like mafia people around him. His muscle essentially, and he's pointing a gun at this poor assistant's head, because she lost him his dog, and they have a little back and forth. She's like, he's asking her what happened, demanding to know what happened. And we get the impression that he's very in love with his dog. Again, without the film expressly telling us, it's clear by like his kind of stress about the situation. She's of course scared. Not Olga Kurylenko. No. I'm talking about the African American assistant that was walking the dog when the dog disappeared. So they have a little back and forth. She's telling him that she just turned around for a second and the dog was gone, and he's like, well, why did you run in that case? And she was like, because I know you were gonna kill me. And he's like, well, yeah, that's a fair point, I suppose. So they have this kind of like friendly no, not friendly, but banter nonetheless. And then when he goes to shoot her, his gun jams, which is like a recurring theme, a recurring gag in the movie, which I felt was quite fun as well. and essentially like he lets her live afterwards because his gun jammed. So she runs along. By the way, thank you very much for the drinks, Ari. Anyway, I remarked at about 16 minutes in that I was fully gripped into what was going on with the movie. It was, everything, all of the scenes jumbled together, the characters introduced in a very fun and exciting way, the writing being so good. I was fully gripped. Hello there, Estefano. Welcome. I appreciate your presence at today's review. How are you doing, my friend? Anyway, as I was saying, I was fully gripped. And I was even more so gripped when the Quaker story appeared. Throughout this whole movie, Marty is writing a script for what appears to be kind of this movie, more or less, which is something that you learn as you go forward. We will be talking about that a little bit more. But the Quaker story was suddenly inserted in, and it was just like a story of an old man. It was a story of a young man actually who killed a woman in his Quaker community. Quaker, I suppose, is some Christian, some other American Christian group. You have so many of them: Amish people, Mormon people. It's crazy over there. Anyway, we just have the Protestants and the Catholics here, more or less. So he killed this woman, and he went to jail for life for it. But he managed to repent, and he was fully changed man, dedicated his life to religion, and, got out. But he was always hunted by this old Quaker man who was apparently like either the murdered girl's father or grandfather, most likely father. And then, he, even though he was fully repentant, this guy, he was always like being watched by this old man, and so far he kind of realized that the only way he can escape is to go to hell by committing suicide. But as he committed suicide, he saw that the old man who was watching him, he also was committing suicide at that moment. I don't want to get any more graphic here on Twitch, but very interesting story that was suddenly inserted in. I sort of give you the Cliff Notes version of that. And I was suddenly like, oh my god, this movie has breaks in narrative. It's kind of like abstract in that way. It kind of meshes the art of the movie with the actual art in the movie, which, I felt like that's something that I really, really enjoy. Quakers are like Amish in a way, but they moved forward with technology. Ah, I see. That's good. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting, nonetheless. All of these religious groups kind of like developing there. We later find out that the Quaker story was a copycat. There's the Quaker, by the way, on screen right now, the old Quaker that was hunting him. We later realized that the Quaker story was a copycat. I was about to, watching the movie, I was about to compliment, Marty, who so far seemed like a very poor screenwriter from what I've seen in the movie, which was also done very well. It was clear, that he was struggling for stories and he was trying to copy from what his crazy friend told him about. But then when he came up with a story like that, I was like, damn, that's pretty good. But then at a party, it was revealed that Billy was actually the one that told him that story. So again, very interesting development, kind of plot thickening in a way. The plot thickens is also a very good phrase to use when reviewing this movie, because the plot thickens in this literally every 10 minutes. It's it goes deeper and deeper every time. With these, and this little thing of realizing that the only good story that he wrote was something that he stole off of his friend. You start realizing that he is a struggling writer, to say the least, which I was kind of sorry not to not to like read more into, or not to for this like story arc not to be developed a little bit more in the latter half of the movie. But the latter half of the movie is a theme for itself, I feel like. Anyways, as I was saying about the breaking of the of like the story structures, or the breaks in the narrative, I really liked at first the blurring of the lines between reality and art. It kind of reminded me of like a short movie that I've done in the past, where it was kind of about like a writer making like his creations essentially come to life, and blurring the line between like his art and reality, like his reality essentially. And the film kind of like went along with a similar concept, I felt like, for a while, where we weren't sure whether these dream sequences of both the Quaker story, and then there was another one of a Vietnamese psychopath as well. He was considered like psychopath number 5 or something. You would always get these text introductions in like the movie, like psychopath number 4, number 5, or whatever. And you would always wonder like if that was in their reality as well, or if that was just like something that Marty wrote, something they came up with out of nowhere. But like, for example, the psychopath number 1, even though like the introduction of the movie kind of seemed after a while that it was just like one of these like dream sequences that, or not dream sequences essentially, but sequences of something that Marty wrote. There were actual headlines of this happening, in their world. So there were kind of like blurs of what's real, what's reality, and the movie was kind of building on it, and I liked it. And it kind of shifted in the latter half of the movie. I think that's the most controversial latter half of a movie that I've ever seen, I feel like. And we are slowly getting to it. Yeah, one of the last things that happened, like that I really liked, with like blurring the lines of reality between the movie and its art, or the art that Marty produces, is when you find out that Hans, essentially, he always wore a cravat, and when he took off that cravat, you saw like a scar from okay, I have to be graphic anyway. In the Quaker story, the form of suicide that they chose was the slicing of the throat. And when Hans like undid his cravat, it was clear that he had a scar of like throat slicing. So now you realize, okay, so the Quaker story wasn't just something that Marty wrote or just stole of a story of Billy. It was actually a real story that he stole from Billy, that heard it from this guy. So again, you weren't sure what is real and what isn't real. The movie worked with that very, very well towards like the first half of the movie, and this all kind of like ramped up as like the main plot point of the movie developed, which was essentially that Hans' pet snatching scheme kind of like worked very well to make him money, but also he managed to steal this dog that belonged to this mafioso, Woody Harrelson, that I introduced. And the whole idea behind the film was essentially of this Woody Harrelson character, this mafioso, hunting them down, and them having to shoot their way out of the dogpen. Or rather, like psychopath number 1, which was the Jack of Diamonds, essentially some serial killer that only went after criminals, shot people at the dog pen, which at first I thought it was just like a crazy Deus Ex Machina, because there was a bunch of these mafiosos that came into the dog pen to retrieve the dog, even though the dog wasn't there, and had a gun pointed at both Hans and Marty. But then the Jack of Diamonds, a random psychopath, just went in. But later in the movie, we find out that it's actually Billy, who not only works on the dog snatching scheme with Hans. There you see them both together, Billy on the left, Hans on the right. but he also happens to be the masked Jack of Diamonds. So it wasn't Deus Ex Machina after all, very interestingly, but it looked like it at first. But anyway, the whole plot is then that they then take the dog, take a car, and go out into the desert to kind of like escape those mafiosos chasing them, because they have the dog of the boss. And that's essentially what the whole movie is like. That's not what the whole movie is about, but that's the main plot point essentially. Second half of the movie is great. Well, that is, I think, where the point of discussion will be. Because I don't know, honestly. The second part of the movie completely took me by surprise. So they're, going to the desert to kind of like escape. And Marty starts talking about the script that he's writing. And he says, it like starts, like this whole thing starts off great, but I'm like in half of the movie now and I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, we're in the half of this movie. And then from that moment on, it just kept getting more and more meta. Marty and Billy were arguing about the ongoing course of the script that, Marty now decided to invite Billy to help him write, and eventually Hans as well. And at this point, they're arguing over what should happen in the rest of the movie that they are in. Very interesting concept. Very interesting concept indeed. And I must say, I don't remember a movie doing it this way or doing like a similar thing that I've ever seen. Many very original pieces that I've reviewed in the past. Like, props to you guys for recommending these movies, because they are great. They are very interesting. They are very interesting to review and think about. So the movie kind of goes into this very prolonged camping that they have in the desert, where they argue both about the script and about their lives, essentially. They find out that Billy is the Jack of Diamonds and that he killed like multiple people even though they were criminals, and Marty is kind of like against that. But before then, they also like have a shot at finishing out the movie. Billy here writes like a crazy final shootout that's also shown in the movie. So like what he wrote essentially not materializes in their world, but there is a sequence that is shot as like Billy would write it. So it's like a final showdown at a cemetery at night, where the Jack of Diamonds, which is him essentially, writes to or like sends a message to this Hans, not to Hans, but to this main guy character, which is portrayed again by Woody Harrelson. So it's a little meta at least, and the message essentially is, come alone and unarmed and get your dog. I'm done fighting. But the mafioso comes with all of his muscle, essentially every single guy, and they all have guns. And it's a massive shoodown between him and like his friends, the remaining 7 psychopaths, which are like a mix between the fictional ones, like the Quaker character, the Vietnamese guy. Then there's other psychopaths that I didn't really mention, that occurred there, that happened to be there as well. I didn't feel like talking about them too much. They were interesting, but I don't think that they were important for the plot as a whole. But anyway, 7 psychopaths shooting against all this muscle, against the mafiosos, and it's like a classic like epic shootout to end the movie, where like almost everybody dies and Jack of Diamonds sacrifices himself and all of that, and it's a bit crazy. It's like a classic B-movie shootout that's is it's a standard. It's like kind of like a staple, I feel like. And the way it was shot and the way it was written, it more felt like a satire on how primitive essentially this ending to a movie is, which I liked. The fact that it's essentially a critique of this very cheap standard shootout, which I think was done right for the first time, or for the last time in like Die Hard, number 2 maybe. And after that, it was all a cheap recreation, and that was unoriginal and like kind of silly. Even in the movie that I reviewed, Nobody, with Bob Odenkirk, it was also like kind of like standard and like not very fun. I mean, I guess it was fun, but it's only like what is the word? Spectacle. It's just spectacle. There's like no depth to it. And this part of the movie essentially satirized it, which I liked. But then there was lots of arguing about the scripts. There was multiple people, there was Hans, Billy, and Marty essentially stuck together in the desert and talking about what's going to happen. Marty is more on the side of like, you know what, there was enough violence. Let's make it more like calm and like nothing's happening. And I realized they are writing the movie in front of my eyes. Like they are essentially doing what they're saying they're doing. Nothing is happening. And I'm slowly getting bored watching this. And I feel like, okay, this is meta. This is kind of like original and stuff. But I'm getting kind of like bored, and it's like cool. I mean, yeah, you wrote this meta in there, but like, let's further the story along a little bit, please. And at that point, somebody said, I think, oh yeah, Hans said, literally, and this is a quote, man, these psychopaths get kind of tiresome after a while. At an exact moment where I felt tiresome, that I felt the movie was tiresome. So again, like at that point, not again, but at that point, I felt very conflicted, because on one hand, I felt like they dropped the ball on the pacing and the storytelling, and sacrificed it for something like original and conceptual, which like was completely different from the first half of the movie. But the movie acknowledged it, and like it clearly showed that it did all of this on purpose. So that gave me pause, and I wasn't sure where it's going to take it from there. But anyway, back to the review. At this point, I realized something. It's not only like meta and trying to blur the lines between... this is the Jack of Diamonds, by the way, on the screen right now, if you haven't seen the movie. It's not only about blurring the lines between reality and art, but it's literally the existential crisis of a screenwriter. Hence the title of this stream. At that point, like, I was kind of amazed. I was kind of bored, but then amazed again that they were doing this on purpose and they knew what they were doing. And I was curious of where it was going to go. And then I felt like, you know what? I think I know what's happened here. So, as a writer, what happens is, like, when you're writing a story and you don't have it fully laid out, if you don't see a story in front of you that you know the beginning and end to, you often get stuck somewhere in the middle. The last story that I was writing, and I'm kind of like still writing, but I didn't get to it in a long time, is that I got stuck in the middle again, and I didn't know how it was going to end and how it was going to develop. And at that point, you have like a crisis of like kind of like faith, or crisis rather of competing narratives, where you can put this like give the story this direction or this direction. Essentially, exactly what Marty and Billy were talking about. Marty wanted it to make it more mellow and like less violent and something more like thoughtful, while Billy wanted like a big shootout or something, and Hans wanted something else as well. And I realized that, you know, these characters or what it felt to me like, at least, these characters are representing the different ideas that Martin McDonagh has in his head as a screenwriter as he's writing it. And he has this crisis, much like other writers have, much like I do, for example, and decided, you know what, this is very authentic to me as a person, which is, you know, how generally to make good art, like trying to express something authentic to you in some sort of a story that captures the feeling or emotions that you're feeling. And he said, you know what, this is very authentic, this is the strongest feeling that I have, this kind of indecision, this kind of crisis. I'm gonna put this crisis in the movie. And here is essentially what is the most kind of like controversial part for me. I see what he's done there. I understand, you know, I see that he's a good writer. He made the first half of the movie fantastic. He gripped me. There was incredible dialogue. The storytelling was fantastic, and it worked, you know, perfectly together. And then the second half came along, and he inserted his crisis there. And I feel like on one hand, he's a writer. I'm not the writer of the same stature by any means, but I write as well, so I can kind of understand these feelings. And there are many other writers, and every single one of these writers can do this, okay? Every single writer can take their crisis of indecision and put it in a movie, and put it in like the movie or a story or something. Everybody can do that, okay? If you're writing a movie and you're not sure where to go with it, you can write in your movie essentially that you're not sure where to go with it, which is essentially what he's done. Now, what he's done that not everybody can do is that he's written it much better, and he clearly has a pulse on the audience that is phenomenal. So you have these, or I have these two like streams of mind essentially, where one is saying, I mean, I can do that. This is like simple. You just have a crisis and you put the crisis in there. You have like an obstacle that you can't get over, and instead of getting over the obstacle, you put an obstacle in there. But he made the obstacle very cool and very interesting, and essentially he made the obstacle the way of getting over the obstacle, if you know what I mean. I mean, it's a little complicated the way I'm saying it, but I feel like that's the best kind of metaphor that I'm gonna find for it. He didn't know what to do about getting over his writing crisis, so he put the writing crisis in the movie. It's an interesting and like cool way of overcoming difficulties. But at the same time, like it's not like from a storytelling perspective, it's not good craftsmanship, or it's not a good story, but it's good craftsmanship, that one rather. And this dilemma of whether I like it or I don't like it stayed with me for the rest of the movie, and it stays with me till now, I must say. I am really not sure, which is why it's good that we have 9 viewers, and we are about to have a discussion about this, at least with the people that have seen the movie. Akil, I hope you have seen Seven Psychopaths. Scott, I know you did. Shadow Cotier, I don't know, but feel free to insert yourself in the debate if you have some ideas from what I said as well. The final showdown then rolls along, and it's interestingly made because it's essentially what Billy was writing about, where he invited the main bad guy, Woody Harrelson, to go and get his dog, but to come alone and unarmed. And he actually comes along alone, and it appears that he has no guns, but Billy shoots him in the back. Then they go, search him, and he really is unarmed. There's just a flare gun in his car, which Crazy Billy uses as like a justification for shooting him, that he wasn't actually unarmed. But he's also severely disappointed that there wasn't the final shootout that he envisioned in his script. essentially. Which I feel like is somewhat of a portrayal of the audience that expected some epic finale and could be like satirizing that, which again is smart. And a lot of what the movie is doing is smart, but it's I'm gonna talk about this more in the conclusion, I feel like, but it's it's meta as fuck, dude. It's so meta. It's so meta, I must say. I think it was genius. Well, I mean, it was for sure original. Whether it was genius, that is a point of debate. I think it's becoming a tradition that I again didn't watch the movie. Yeah. I mean, I think like when we get more people in here, it'll be interesting to like make a plan for the whole month, so everybody watches the whole movie, like all of the like 4 movies, for example, per month, that we can then review together, which, you know, would be even more entertaining. I feel like that's kind of like my plan for the future as well. I'm glad you're seeing the same kind of things I saw in it. Yeah, I mean, like it's great craftsmanship again. Like they wrote it well. At that point, it's just a question of whether like the story holds up, you know. The movie, however, did have a great ending, because there is like several things that are going on that I didn't fully mention because I feel like they don't have to be part of this core review. There's, for example, Hans. Hans earlier in the movie has his wife murdered by this bad guy because he tracks Hans down, by Woody Harrelson essentially. But he's like a real like old-timey Christian guy, which is how the film describes him, or how Billy describes him in the movie rather. And he then has like he has a trip because he eats hallucinogenic, I think so, hallucinogenic things from cacti. I didn't know they existed, but some hallucinogens essentially. And damn, that's a tongue twister, by the way. And he kind of trips, like metaphorically trips, that his wife is in front of him. He hallucinates, and he kind of has a crisis of his faith, essentially, whether he believes in afterlife anymore or not. And he provides actually the ending of the movie, or more or less the ending of the movie, where he records something for Marty. He is then shot when he leaves by the muscle, by the people that the main boss, essentially Woody Harrelson, took with him, but made them stay back because he promised that he would come alone. And so Hans is then shot by these guys, but Marty finds his recorder where he recorded his final thoughts, and listens to it. And what's there is like a very interesting, very, very entertaining story that delivers like on the ending of the Vietnamese psychopath, who is first in the film described as like a Vietnam War veteran that was that had all of these things happen to him, like he was fighting in the Vietnam War, and then when he came back to his village, it was, what is the name of the village? Mui Len, I think, name of the Vietnamese village, essentially, which during the Vietnam War saw some of the most horrific war crimes done by the US troops, which pillaged essentially the village. And so that was a story that this guy returned to his village somewhat after the war and saw that all of his relatives had been killed, including his daughters. And so he decides to go to America and track down and kill all of these people. But Marty didn't know where to go with the story anymore, and Hans, kind of in his wisdom, said that, essentially described the story again. But then said that this whole story is somewhat like of a vision that a Buddhist monk sees in 1963 on the streets of Saigon, before he self-immolates. I don't know if you know this real story, by the way, but in 1963, there was obviously North Vietnam and South Vietnam, much like there's North Korea and South Korea. It was during the Vietnam War. And South Vietnam was ruled by Ngoc Dien Niem. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but he was essentially the president of South Vietnam. But he was very he was Catholic Christian, and he despised other faiths. So he was, banning all like Buddhist flags and Buddhist celebrations all around the country. And as a protest against like this oppression, as well as against the war, a monk sat in the middle of the road, poured gasoline on him, and lit himself on fire, producing one of the most famous photographs from the Vietnam War era and in the world. And it is a famous story that the Huns essentially used to weave this fictional story of this Vietnamese war veteran into it, essentially portraying it as a vision. And I must say, very interesting. The very interesting, somewhat ending. I say somewhat because then there is also, the credits begin, and the credits like burn towards the end, which not towards the end, but actually only like 5 credits go, and then the credits like burn off, and suddenly there is Marty again after the end of his after his film came out, essentially. And he gets a call from one of the psychopaths, but like that's not important. It's just important to note that there are these there's this after credits scene where the credits like burn off, essentially only giving off more of a meta feel of the whole movie. And the Huns ending that I really liked. But we move to the conclusion, what I actually thought overall. I think that it's important to know that this is a movie that tried to play both sides. It's a screenwriter that felt like, I could entertain more people by giving them a spectacle of like shootouts, and I know that I can write a good shooting movie, a good crime movie, because it's not that easy. It's very easy to fall into thriller cliches, like a billion blockbusters do every single year, or make like a shitty superhero movie, like essentially any Marvel or DC movie. Sorry about that. I can't stop I can't stop firing shots at these movies. But like he knew that he had the power of making it actually entertaining and interesting, which he did precisely in the first half. But he wasn't sure if he didn't want to do something else by making it more like of a peaceful ending or peaceful latter half of the movie, and decided to not only do both of these, but he also decided to put this indecision in there, which he did very well, and it was very original. But I cannot shake the feeling that this was somewhat of a writing cop-out. Much like the second half of the movie, which is, the main point of discussion here. It sure is original, but it feels like the good writing in separate scenes are just something that masks the glaring failure of the writer's storytelling. That's kind of like what I meant to say, essentially. It's a very interesting thought process of including that, but I felt like him being a good writer kind of masks the fact that it is probably just a cop-out, because I very often feel exactly what he portrayed there, which is good. Like, that's the other thing. Now you're good. Okay, thanks. Which is the other thing that makes me feel the movie is good, because it portrays my feelings as a writer very well. But I feel like the feelings that it portrays is something that I want to get over. It's almost like they're portraying a writer's block, which is a different movie. I feel like, because that's the other thing, right? If this whole movie was only about like a writer's perspective, writer's block, and wouldn't be like more or less a blockbuster like this one, then I would kind of understand, and I'm not sure if I would enjoy that movie even as a writer, but I don't know. But it's the fact that it literally takes a good story of the movie that's written extremely well and phenomenally, like exceptionally well, structured, but and it takes this product that's very good, and that it shows the mishmash of an unfinished product. It's almost as if it's like a first draft of the script where the writer just quickly put down all of his feelings, and his block and his lack of determination in where to send that movie, and just tweaked it a lot so it has good writing. That is kind of what it feels like. But again, I mean, what it wants to portray, it portrays well. That's important to say.